Greetings, everyone. I'm here to assist you today. If you enjoy using this video to drift off to sleep, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel before you doze off. What's your location, and what time are you tuning in right now? Take a moment to unwind and enjoy the tranquility. What began as a typical journey transformed into something extraordinary. A night drive along a lonely road, headlights slicing through the darkness while the comforting hum of my car filled the air. The road unfurled before me, a dark ribbon extending into the horizon, boundless and desolate, illuminated only by the soft shimmer of the stars overhead. Though I wasn't pressed for time, an unsettling sense lingered, hinting that something was amiss. The atmosphere hung heavy in the stillness, a profound weight, and my heart raced just a bit faster than usual. I've taken numerous night trips in the past, and I genuinely enjoy them. In the quiet moments, a unique tranquility unfolds. It's just me cruising along the open road, surrounded by a world at rest. Yet that night, an unusual tension hung in the air, reminiscent of the stillness before a tempest. As the clock struck midnight, I became aware of the car trailing closely behind me. Initially, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just another set of headlights in my rearview mirror, about 100 meters behind, keeping pace with me. However, after traveling a few miles, I observed something unusual. The car hadn't overtaken me. I hadn't even attempted to let it. The road stretched ahead, a constant companion, trailing behind me at just the right distance, visible enough to catch my eye, yet respectful of my space. I initially brushed it off, thinking perhaps we were headed in the same direction. Initially, it seemed like just another random car, but as we continued on our journey, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. I made an effort to accelerate slightly to check if they had overtaken me. They kept their pace, perhaps believing they could encircle me. Absolutely nothing. They kept in sync, mirroring my every action. A tight knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach as I cranked up the radio, seeking the comforting embrace of background noise to pull me away from my thoughts. It was unsuccessful. With my grip tightening on the steering wheel, I inhaled deeply, pushing myself to concentrate on the road ahead. I kept reminding myself that my feelings were just paranoia. The hour was late, and maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me, but that car seemed to hover like a shadow, lingering just within reach, allowing me to feel its presence without ever fully showing itself. Approximately 20 kilometers down the road, I came across a sign pointing to a rest area. In a split second, I activated my turn signal and veered off the highway, eager to shake off the car tailing me. As I veered onto the exit ramp, I glanced in the rearview mirror, anticipating the sight of it trailing behind, but reality had other plans. Instead, they trailed behind me as I made my way through the exit. My heart raced. These things were beginning to take a strange turn, uncomfortably strange. I reassured myself that they were likely just pausing for gas or a quick break, yet the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing moment. The rest area exuded a soft glow and an unusual stillness. Just a handful of streetlights flickered, casting a dim glow over a few vacant parking spaces. I pulled up beside the driveway and switched off the engine, making an effort to appear casual as I glanced out of the corner of my eye. I took a quick look in the rearview mirror. The vehicle was positioned just 2 spots over, a choice that seemed illogical. Why choose to park so near when there were plenty of other spaces available? My fingers hovered above the ignition key for a moment. I considered leaving, yet something held me back. Perhaps I was being a bit over the top, amplifying the situation. Yet, an unsettling sensation lingered, as if unseen eyes were fixed upon me. I stepped out of the car, feigning a stretch, and casually glanced at the vehicle. The darkened windows limited the driver's line of sight. My heart raced as I hurried to the nearby convenience store in the rest area, convincing myself that all I needed was a bottle of water, perhaps a snack, something to soothe my frayed nerves. The interior of the store mirrored the desolation of the parking lot outside. An uninterested employee lounged behind the counter, engrossed in his phone, hardly glancing up as I entered. I strolled through the aisles, my thoughts racing, putting on a brave face despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. With a refreshing bottle of water in hand, I made my way to the checkout. It was at that moment I spotted a car parked outside, visible through the store's front window. It remained still. The engine purred softly, its headlights casting eerie, elongated shadows across the parking lot. "Whomever, is it a busy night?" I asked the clerk nonchalantly as I handed him a $20 bill. The clerk glanced up and shrugged. "It's not just you, really." I glanced outside once more, a knot tightening in my stomach. "Have you ever seen individuals hanging around this area at night?" The clerk arched an eyebrow, tracking my gaze to the car. "Occasionally, unexpected events unfold on the highway, wouldn't you agree?" His words offered no comfort whatsoever. With my change in hand, I exited the store, eager to uncover the whereabouts of my missing car upon returning to my own. Yet the number remained, and as I made my way across the parking lot, I noticed the driver's door slightly ajar. My breath hitched as I hurried along, my hands shaking as I frantically searched for my keys. I approached my car, flung the door open, and slipped inside, locking it with clammy fingers. My hands felt slick as I turned the key in the ignition, yet my eyes were drawn to the other car. The occupant remained inside, but I could sense their stare, as if they were poised for a moment that was yet to unfold. In a split second, I shifted the car into reverse and swiftly maneuvered out of the parking lot, rejoining the highway with purpose. My heart raced, yet I reassured myself that I was secure. Whatever it may have been, it has come to an end. Yet, as I glanced in the rearview mirror, they appeared once more. The familiar glow of those headlights was trailing me once more. This time, they were nearer than ever. A wave of panic surged through me. I accelerated, but the other vehicle was right on my tail. Their headlights intensified in my mirrors, tracking my every maneuver. I attempted to shake them off by switching lanes and taking unexpected exits, yet no matter where I turned, they remained right on my tail. For a brief moment, I eased off the gas to let them overtake me, curious to catch a glimpse of the driver. Instead of zooming past, the car lingered beside me, mirroring my speed for a few heart-stopping seconds. As I glanced toward the window, the dim light revealed a silhouette at the wheel, a dark figure, its face obscured by shadows, fixated on the road ahead. My heart raced in my ears as I pushed myself to go faster, determined to create as much space as I could between us. For a fleeting instant, the car lagged behind, and I dared to hope, perhaps, just perhaps, I had evaded them. However, they picked up speed once more, narrowing the gap. I was completely in the dark about their intentions, but I had no intention of uncovering them. All I could think about was reaching a location bustling with people, a place that felt secure. After what seemed like an endless pursuit, I finally spotted the warm glow of a gas station in the distance. The bright lights illuminated the dark highway, serving as a beacon of safety. I veered off and strolled through the parking lot, my heart racing in my chest. I anticipated the car would trail behind me, but it chose not to. It moved on, its taillights gradually dimming until they vanished completely from sight. I lingered in that moment, my breath coming in heavy bursts, as I fought to steady the adrenaline surging through my veins. The gas station attendant cast a curious glance my way from behind the counter, but honestly, I was unfazed. What mattered most was the realization that I was no longer alone, and that was more than enough. I gathered my strength and pressed on with my journey. The remainder of the night unfolded in a haze of frayed nerves, yet the car remained absent. I still find myself puzzled about who was trailing me and the reasons behind it. It could have been a harmless prank, or perhaps something far more malevolent lurking beneath the surface. That journey imparted a chilling realization. No matter how well you know the path, you can never be certain of who might be observing you. I've always had a special fondness for road trips. Embraced the exhilaration of the open road, where adventure awaits at every turn and the possibilities are endless. 4 months, my friends and I eagerly anticipated this trip, a thrilling cross-country adventure, where we could explore at our own pace, stopping wherever our hearts desired, free from a rigid schedule. An overview of the destinations we aimed to explore. The journey was meant to be about creating unforgettable moments, not adhering to a strict itinerary. Reflecting on that day, I can't help but feel we should have been more disciplined with our plans. We found ourselves on the 3rd day of our journey, traversing the vast plains of the Midwest. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in vibrant shades of orange, and the atmosphere inside the car was electric. Music filled the air as we traveled, the back seats scattered with snack wrappers, and a sense of complete relaxation enveloped us. As Jason, the one behind the wheel, made a suggestion, he glanced in the rearview mirror at us in the back seat. "There's an old scenic road a little further ahead," he said. "As we journey through charming old towns, we might just stumble upon the perfect camping spot for the night." Initially, I had my doubts about the concept. The GPS guided us toward a major highway, promising a direct route to the next town where we intended to enjoy dinner and locate a motel. Despite my initial reservations, Jason was adamant about veering off the main road, and the enthusiasm of everyone else was contagious, leading us to agree to the change in plans. As we left the highway behind and ventured onto that winding 2-lane road, a shift occurred. Majestic trees, standing sentinel as we journeyed onward, flanked the worn and rugged pavement. Sunlight streamed through the branches at unusual angles, creating a captivating play of light, while the air thickened, hinting at a shift in atmosphere the moment we departed from the highway. Initially, silence enveloped the room as no one spoke up. We found ourselves captivated by the sense of isolation the road exuded, as if we had discovered a long-forgotten path that had remained untouched for years. 30 minutes later, I realized the GPS had lost its signal. The small blue dot trailing behind us on the map remained stubbornly still, unwilling to refresh. I brought it up to Jason, but he merely brushed it aside. He mentioned that the trees are likely obstructing the signal. Eventually, we'll venture out to an open space. I had my doubts, but I'd prefer to avoid the path meandered gracefully among the towering trees, converging with every kilometer since we made the turn. No other cars had crossed our path, and with each passing mile, the sense of isolation deepened. An hour later, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving us enveloped in near total darkness. The car's headlights struggled to cut through the dense shadows of the trees, transforming the mood within the vehicle. We all gazed out the window, searching for any hint of life, a clue to our whereabouts. That's when it dawned on us that we had been going around in circles. "Hold on, isn't that the same sign we saw an hour back?" I leaned forward, eager to catch a clearer glimpse through the windshield. A weathered metal sign leaned against the roadside, partially obscured by overgrown weeds. It had an unsettling sense of familiarity. Jason furrowed his brow and eased his pace, sensing an unsettling familiarity. "It simply can't be. I've walked the journey." Turning back was simply not an option. Yet, beneath the surface, the truth was evident to us all. Inexplicably, we found ourselves back at the starting line. A sense of discomfort started to swell within me as I glanced at my phone once more, only to find it still lacking a signal. We were utterly cut off from communication. Perhaps it's time for us to return. Sarah, my closest friend, remarked from the back seat with a hint of tension in her voice, "This doesn't feel right." After a moment of uncertainty, Jason finally gave a nod of agreement. "Absolutely, I agree. Let's hit the highway again." He shifted the car into reverse, executed a smooth U-turn, and began retracing our route. In that fleeting instant, a spark of relief washed over me. We would retrace our steps, return to the main road, and chuckle at how we had let our fears get the best of us. As we continued our drive, the road began to take on a new appearance. The contours were more defined. The thick canopy of trees shrouded the path, with headlights struggling to pierce through the darkness, revealing only a few meters ahead. That road was different from the one we had taken before. A wave of panic started to wash over me. "I can't believe this is the same road," I murmured, more to myself than to anyone around. "Just keep driving," Sarah urged, her voice quivering with tension. "We'll discover the highway." Yet, the uncertainty in her voice was unmistakable. Everyone experienced it. The journey stretched on, twisting through the darkness, with only the steady hum of tires rolling over the uneven pavement breaking the silence in the car. In an instant, Jason hit the brakes hard. The car came to an abrupt halt in the center of the road, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. Before us, shrouded in the faint glow of the headlights, stood a weathered gas station. The sign at the top flickered softly, casting a gentle glow over the structure. A solitary, rusted bomb loomed at the forefront, shrouded in a veil of dust and cobwebs. "We'll definitely stop to ask for directions," Jason said, though his tone lacked certainty. I scanned the area, eager to spot someone within the gas station, but it appeared deserted. It had likely been that way for years. Ultimately, our choices were quite limited. As we eased our way toward the pump, Jason stepped out of the car. We observed him making his way to the store's entrance, glancing through the shadowy windows. We remained in the car, our eyes fixed on the road trailing behind us. Time ticked away, yet Jason remained absent. "Where on earth is he?" Sarah whispered, gripping the seat in front of her tightly. "I'm not sure," I replied. I cleared my parched throat. "Perhaps no one is present." Just as we were about to make a decision, the store door creaked open, and out stepped Jason. His face was ashen as he slipped into the car, gently shutting the door behind him. "What happened?" I inquired softly. Jason fixed his gaze on the road ahead. "There's no one inside," he whispered, pausing mid-sentence. With his eyes wide open, he replied, "But what?" pressing Sarah for an answer. Jason gulped. "Is there something to eat in there?" "What does that even mean?" I inquired, puzzled. He glanced in my direction. Wholesome ingredients. My skin started to tingle. The circumstances were not ideal. "This was not the case. Let's go," I urged, my voice quivering with anticipation. With a nod, Jason ignited the engine and set the car in motion. We pulled away from the gas station, plunging back into the enveloping darkness. Yet, the sensation of being pursued lingered, refusing to fade away. As we pulled away from the gas station, an oppressive silence settled in the car. Absolutely nobody, though no one was willing to acknowledge it, we all shared the same sentiment. There was an unmistakable sense of something being amiss. The shadows cast by the trees felt thicker, the bends of the road more pronounced. Each time I glanced out the window, an unsettling sensation washed over me, as if something, or someone, was lurking in the darkness, observing us. Sarah curled up, hugging her knees tightly in the back seat. "I really don't like this," she muttered. "I really don't like it," Jason said, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, his eyes locked on the road ahead. "We simply need to press on," he said softly. "We'll locate the highway." The road continued to stretch on, seemingly endless. I glanced at my phone once again, only to find it still lacking a signal. Though the battery was low, it was the least of my concerns. The most chilling sensation was the haunting realization that we were trapped in a realm that defied existence. In the distance, we spotted lights, headlights from a car. My heart raced. "Hey, it seems there's another traveler on this path." The lights shone brilliantly, drawing nearer with rapid intensity. In that fleeting instant, a wave of relief washed over me. We weren't alone, yet as the car approached, an unsettling feeling crept in. "Can you clarify why I didn't hear the engine running?" Sarah inquired softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The vehicle raced forward at an alarming speed, yet it emitted no noise whatsoever. The engine remained silent, the tires made no contact with the asphalt, and all that could be felt was the increasing intensity of the headlights drawing nearer. "Jason, step away from the road," I shouted. With a sudden twist of the steering wheel, Jason sent the car careening off the road. We hardly had a moment to respond before the silent car glided by us. For a brief moment, the lights overwhelmed our senses, and then the car vanished from sight. I caught no glimpse of license plates, nor did I spot a driver, only a fleeting shadow that disappeared into the street. We lingered in utter silence, the engine of our car purring gently in the background. Jason broke the silence. "You saw that, right?" I softly said. "We saw it, yet I'm uncertain about what it truly is." Sarah broke down in the back seat, her hands shielding her face as she cried, "I want to get out of here," she pleaded through her tears. "I want to leave now." Jason gripped the steering wheel tightly. "All right, let's get started." He ignited the engine and pressed the accelerator, feeling the rush of speed. Our destination didn't matter. All we craved was to escape that wretched road. After what felt like an eternity on the road, we finally caught sight of it. Suddenly, there it was. We had noticed the highway sign for the scenic road exit previously. In some way, we would return. With unwavering confidence, Jason slammed down on the accelerator. We merged onto the highway, leaving the past behind us. The silence enveloped the group for the rest of the journey. Upon reaching the next town, we pulled into the parking lot of a quaint little motel. We lingered in the car, lost in thought, as the minutes stretched on, each one a test of our resolve to step outside. As we approached the front desk, the receptionist regarded us with a look of intrigue. "Is everything all right?" Jason attempted a smile, yet his complexion remained ashen. "Indeed, we just took an unexpected turn," Jason clarified. The receptionist nodded knowingly, as they set off on the picturesque journey ahead. We stood still. "Indeed," I responded, my voice quivering slightly. The woman observed us in silence for a brief moment before letting out a sigh. They ought not to have. We exchanged glances, speechless in the moment. The receptionist smoothly passed the room key across the counter. We chose not to inquire further. That night, even though we had found refuge in a motel room, sleep eluded us all. We set off early the next morning, leaving that night behind us without a word. Yet, in the stillness of the night, as I shut my eyes, those headlights flashed before me, and I can't help but ponder what might have unfolded had we not discovered the highway in time. That unforgettable, chilling night will always stay with me. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a breathtaking palette of purple and orange across the sky. However, on the farm, the light faded swiftly. Dusk descends swiftly when you're enveloped by vast open fields, with only distant trees marking the horizon. That's when the world seems to pause, enveloped in an unsettling silence. I spent the entire afternoon tinkering with the tractor, determined to restore that trusty machine to its former glory. Staying up late to fix equipment was a regular occurrence for me, but that night there was an unmistakable tension in the air. The atmosphere was thick, nearly overwhelming, reminiscent of the stillness that precedes a tempest. It wasn't just me who picked up on that. The cows exhibited signs of restlessness. They paced along the pasture's edge, heads lowered, snorting repeatedly. Typically, they are calm and composed, so witnessing their agitation raised my concerns. I reassured myself that their nerves were simply a reaction to a nearby coyote or some other creature that had ventured too close. Yet, beneath that surface, an unsettling feeling lingered, refusing to let go. As I stood beneath the tractor's hood, I meticulously wiped the grease from my hands with a rag. That was the moment I first laid eyes on him, or more accurately, on them, standing at the distant boundary of my property, precisely where the field converges with the tree line. A figure caught my eye, standing there. At that distance, identifying the figure proved challenging, yet it remained still. I stood there, frozen like a statue, gazing in my direction. I narrowed my eyes, pondering if it could be one of my neighbors, Yet there was something off about his stance. His rigid stance appeared quite unnatural. I scanned the surroundings, searching for any indication of another person or a vehicle that could have delivered him. But there was nothing. Only that solitary figure and the deepening shadows as the light faded away. My initial reaction was to cry out and offer assistance, but the words caught in my throat. A voice inside me urged against it. I remained rooted in place, observing intently, attempting to unravel the meaning behind what unfolded before me. As I remained motionless, the weight of the moment enveloped me, and the air thickened around me. The cows gathered closely by the fence, their snorts evolving into soft, uneasy moos. In that instant, the figure shifted. It wasn't just a casual step or a typical turn. There was an abrupt jerk, as if an unseen force had tugged on an invisible thread, propelling it forward in an instant. As he stepped closer, a subtle shift that seemed almost insignificant, an icy shiver raced down my spine. Every alarm in my body blared simultaneously. I took a step back, my gaze fixed on the figure as I made my way toward the barn. If this was meant to be a joke, it certainly hit the mark. I refused to allow a stranger to catch me off guard in the heart of my field. As I approached the barn door, the figure advanced with a peculiar motion, gliding forward rather than walking like an ordinary person. It was more of a slide. As he drew closer, his movements remained stiff, as though his legs were unyielding. With trembling hands, I grasped the barn door latch, my breath coming in quick, uneven gasps as I pushed it open and stepped inside. I was completely unaware that I had been holding my breath until I forcefully closed the door and leaned against it, straining to catch any sound from outside. Silence enveloped the barn. The only sound was the soft rustle of the animals within, yet an unsettling sensation lingered, as if unseen eyes were fixed upon me, observing me. He was gazing at me. The presence lingered, unmistakable and unwavering. I caught a glimpse of the field through a narrow crack in the door. Initially, there was nothing in sight, and a sense of relief washed over me. Perhaps he had vanished. Perhaps he had abandoned whatever pursuit he was engaged in. But then I caught sight of the movement once more. This time, it wasn't merely a single figure. It was 3 of them. My stomach dropped. At the edge of the field stood 3 figures. The boundary of the field met the tree line seamlessly. They remained motionless, their heads inclined ever so slightly in unison, as if they were intently observing me. A chilling stillness enveloped me, and an overwhelming sense of terror crawled across my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that they might catch a glimpse of me sneaking a look through the narrow gap in the barn door, but I'd prefer to keep that uncertainty at bay. I cautiously retreated, my heart racing in my chest. What on earth was I had spent years on this farm, and I had never encountered anything quite like this before. It's hard to believe anyone would dare to pull a prank on me out here in the wilderness. Moreover, there was an unsettling quality to their posture. Too rigid, too unnatural. I knew I had to get to the house. The barn felt too open, too exposed, but between my home and I was a vast empty field, and I would have to walk right across in front of those figures to get there. For a moment I considered calling someone, my neighbor, maybe, or even the police. But when I reached into my pocket, I didn't feel my phone. My pulse quickened. Even more, I'd left it on the tractor. Now I was trapped. I couldn't stay in the barn all night. I had to go into the house, close the doors, and try to figure out what the hell I was passing by. I took a deep breath, getting ready. If they hadn't moved yet, maybe they wouldn't follow me. Maybe they were just there watching. I looked through the crack again. The figures hadn't moved. They were still in the same position with their heads bowed. I counted to 3 in my head. Then I slammed open the barn door and ran. My boots hit the earth hard as I crossed the field, feeling the cold air in my. I didn't dare look back. Every part of me expected to hear footsteps behind me. I expected one of those things to appear out of nowhere in front of me, but there was nothing but my heavy breathing and the distant nervous mooing of the cows. I made it to the porch, almost tripping on the steps. As I rushed to open the door, I threw myself inside and slammed it shut. Securing the bolts with trembling hands, I threw it inside and slammed it shut. Securing the bolts with trembling hands, I took a step back, trying to calm my breath. Then I looked out the window. The Figures were closer now. They were no longer in the tree line. They were right on the edge of the field, just a few meters from my house. Their silhouettes were barely visible in the gloom, but they were there and still not moving. I felt my heart beating so much, and then one of them raised an arm slowly and pointed directly at me. An icy chill ran down my spine, felt aback, feeling like my body was shaking. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't something I could explain. I didn't know who or what those figures were, but I knew they weren't human. I felt it in my bones. I turned and grabbed the kitchen phone with trembling fingers. I dialed my neighbor's number. The phone rang, but no one answered. I tried again. Nothing. Despair began to take over me. I felt trapped. The walls of the house seemed to close around me. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't leave either. For the next hour, I walked around the house looking out the windows. Every time, a few minutes, the figures never came closer. But they didn't leave either. They stood there watching, waiting. Finally, the sky went completely dark and the field was devoured by the night. Though they were out of sight, I felt their presence lingering on. I sensed it. I spent the entire night wide awake, fixated on the window, unable to drift off to sleep. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, a wave of relief washed over me. I took another glance. The figures have vanished, yet even as I pen these words, an unsettling sensation lingers, that they remain, lurking in the shadows, observing, anticipating. And the most chilling thought of all, will they return? It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, just my girlfriend Kate and I, spending a couple of nights in a secluded cabin in the woods. No phones, no mail, stress-free electronics, just the two of us away from the constant noise of daily life. The drive, there was scenic winding roads traversing dense forests, the autumn leaves painting the landscape vibrant red and orange tones. It was exactly what we had hoped for, but from the moment we entered the cabin something felt strange. The place had its charm. It was rustic but cozy with wooden beams and a stone fireplace. There was even an old guest book on the coffee table, a detail that made the cabin feel even more authentic. I thought it would be full of comments from previous guests talking about how wonderful the place was or recommending the best trails nearby. After unpacking, Kate plopped down on the couch and flipped through the book with a smile. "Look at this," she said, laughing as she read aloud. "We had an amazing time here. The view from the terrace is stunning." I smiled, but couldn't stop the uneasiness from lingering. Maybe it was just the feeling of being so isolated. The way the dense forest surrounded the cabin and the silence was almost too perfect, but I decided to ignore it. We were here to relax. I didn't want to start the weekend with a weird vibe. The first night we spent huddled by the fireplace drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing at once. It was peaceful, just what we needed. But even with the sound of the fire crackling and the heat filling the room, the feeling lingered in my chest. It was like the cabin was too quiet, like the forest was watching us. The next morning I woke up early and made coffee while Kate was still asleep. The sunlight came through the windows, making the cabin feel less threatening, and for a while I started to relax. I sat on the couch with my cup and watched the guest book that Kate had left open on the table. I hadn't checked it the night before, but now, with the morning light illuminating the pages, I was curious. I passed the first few entries, most of them full of happy comments about how peaceful the place was. But as I progressed through the pages, the tone of the messages began to change. At first it was subtle. One entry mentioned strange noises outside, by another spoke of a nagging sense of being watched. Though the author chalked it up to his imagination, I frowned and kept turning pages. Notes were getting shorter, more urgent. I woke up with footsteps outside the cabin. There was no one there when I checked. Knocks on the window, too dark to see who it was. "This place feels wrong. We're leaving early." A shiver ran down my spine. I read the last entry. The lyrics were hurried, almost shaky. "They're watching. They're waiting for us. Don't look outside." The air in the cabin suddenly felt heavier. Kate stirred on the bed and I slammed the book shut, not wanting to worry her. I paused for a moment, feeling my heart race in my chest. Maybe it was just a joke, someone trying to scare the next guests, but the fear in those words was. Kate left the bedroom stretching with a smile. "Good morning," she said, reaching over to give me a kiss on the cheek. "Are you okay? You look weird." I forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, I just woke up early." Breakfast. The rest of the day was normal. We went for a walk on a nearby trail, took pictures of the trees, and spent the afternoon on the terrace enjoying the scenery. For a moment the bad feeling disappeared, but that night everything changed. We went to bed early, exhausted from the hike. I was starting to fall asleep when I heard it, a soft tapping sound, a light and rhythmic sound, as if someone was knocking lightly on the window. I froze, my sleep leaving my body instantly. I held my breath, hoping it was just a branch hitting the glass in the wind, but there it was again. Tap, tap, tap. "You heard that?" Kate whispered next to me in her barely audible voice. Yes, I answered quietly, sitting up in bed. Stay here. I grabbed the flashlight from the bureau and got up with a racing pulse. The tapping, it was still soft but insistent. I slowly approached the window. The curtains were closed. I hesitated for a second before taking one end and very carefully opened them a little. I turned on the flashlight and directed it out. Nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I let out the air I hadn't realized I was holding and looked back at Kate. Probably just the wind, I said, trying to sound carefree. There is nothing outside. She nodded, but didn't seem convinced. We lay down again, but this time it took me a lot harder to relax. I stayed awake for hours listening to every little sound. The next morning I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After breakfast, I went back to check the guest book, hoping my mind was playing tricks, but what I found made my blood run cold. There was a new entrance. I wasn't there the last time I checked it. The same shaky handwriting. They're watching us. They're waiting for us. Don't look outside. I swallowed hard. How had that message appeared? Kate hadn't written it. I hadn't written it, and it definitely wasn't there the day before. I didn't say anything to Kate. I just suggested we leave early. She didn't argue. We packed quickly without bothering to clean too much and left the cabin. As we drove down the road back to the city, I couldn't help but look in the rearview mirror. The cabin was still there in the middle of the woods, as if it was waiting for the next guests, and I couldn't help but wonder who or what was watching us during the night, and worst of all, what would have happened if we had looked outside. You know that feeling when something just doesn't feel right, that heaviness in the stomach, even though everything seems normal on the surface. That was the feeling I had the moment we stepped on that trail. It was supposed to be an easy hike, a round trip through a pretty popular park, but that day the forest felt different, and when I realized how wrong we were to keep going, it was too late. I had been hiking with my best friends Lucas and Nia for years. It was our way of escaping the city, of clearing our minds with the peace and silence of nature. We had walked trails all over the country, from dense forests to towering mountains, but this time we decided to keep it simple and follow a path we already knew well. One we had walked at least a dozen times before. It was a sunny afternoon with the light filtering through the trees in golden ashes, and the forest filled with the familiar sounds of birds and the wind rustling through the leaves. Nothing unusual, just another day on the trail. We parked at the trailhead, adjusted our boots, and set off with light backpacks, water, snacks, a map, though we didn't really think we'd need it. The first half of the hike was perfect. The trail was clear and well marked, winding through the trees with the crunch of the earth and the leaves under our feet. We chatted about work, plans for the weekend, and the usual things. Lucas was always the fastest to walk, so he went ahead, setting a pace that kept Nia and me working to keep up with him. But around the halfway point of the road, something changed. At first it was subtle. The sunlight that before illuminated the forest suddenly seemed dimmer, as if a cloud had covered the sky. But when I looked up, the sky was still clear. The song of the birds that had accompanied us from the beginning had disappeared. The breeze that moved the leaves had stopped. The forest was silent, a silence too deep. At first I didn't say anything, convincing myself that I was just imagining it, but after another kilometer the silence was. It became impossible to ignore. Do you hear that? I asked quietly. Lucas stopped and looked around. Listen to what exactly? I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. There's nothing to listen to. Lucas frowned, but before I could answer, Nia intervened. This is weird. We stood there in the middle of the trail listening to nothing. Not a single sound of birds or the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was as if the forest, I was holding my breath despite the discomfort that was starting to settle in my chest. We kept moving on. The trail was supposed to loop and take us back to the car in an hour or two, but the more we walked, the stranger the forest became. The trees that were spaced out at first and looked familiar began to look closer together, more crooked, their branches intertwining as if they were trying to catch us. The path that was once wide and clear became narrower and full of roots and rocks. I didn't recognize this part of the trail, and that didn't make sense. Are we sure we are still on the right path? I asked, trying to stay calm. Lucas pulled out the map, checking it before looking around with an even more frowning snob. The trail markings were supposed to be around here, but there were no signs, no sign, no trail markers, nothing. The forest had changed. It was as if the path we knew was no longer there. After a few more minutes of walking, Lucas stopped abruptly. I think we should go back. His voice was tense. For the first time he seemed genuinely worried. I nodded quickly, feeling relieved that he finally admitted it. But when we turned around, the way back didn't look familiar either. The trees were closer together, the brush more. I didn't recognize anything. Lucas and Nia noticed it too. What was once a clear path now felt like we were walking in circles into a forest that didn't want to let us out. Fear began to settle in my stomach. I tried not to let my voice tremble when I said, "This doesn't make sense." Lucas didn't answer. He kept checking the map, even though we both knew it didn't make sense to use it anymore, and then I saw it, a movement between the trees, barely perceptible, a flash of something that shouldn't be there. I froze, my heart beating wildly. Did you see that? Nia looked at me with a frown. See what I looked at again, but whatever I had seen was no longer there. However, the fear in my chest became even stronger. Someone or something is moving in the forest. Lucas spun, quickly scanning the trees with wide eyes. Are you sure? I saw it. Nia held on to the strap of her backpack tighter. We have to get out of here. No one argued. We started walking faster anymore, without worrying about following the right path, just wanting to get out. But the deeper we walked, the deeper the forest seemed, and the stronger it was, the feeling that we weren't alone. Every now and then I saw something move through the trees, never enough to make it out, but enough to know it was there. It was watching us, and then, just as panic was about to take hold of us, we came to a small opening in the woods. It was a clearing. It didn't make sense because we didn't remember passing through it before, but there it was, and in the center from the clearing on the grass, there was something that made us stop in our tracks. Our backpacks, exactly where they should have been if we'd never left the trailhead, but we knew we'd walked for hours. No one spoke. We looked at each other, the fear reflected in our eyes, and then, without a second thought, we ran. We didn't stop until we saw the parking lot with our car waiting for us. When we finally got inside and locked, we stayed silent. We knew we hadn't imagined anything. We knew something had been following us, and the worst thing was that we never understood how we had gotten back to the trailhead, or if we had really left the woods. Have you ever seen something so out of place that your brain tries to make sense of it in the most rational way possible, like when you drive late at night and you see something in the sky, and your first instinct is to tell yourself it's a plane or maybe the light from a distant tower? That's how it all started for me. Just a night ride back home, nothing out of the ordinary, until I saw those lights hovering over the countryside. It was around 11 p.m. and I was driving back from a weekend trip with my girlfriend Jess. We were going for one of those long stretches of road where the road seems to disappear into the darkness, and there's not a single car in sight for miles, just us, the road, and the stars. I remember the first time I saw the lights. They seemed to be quite far away in the distance. They were faint, barely visible over a field that stretched to our right. At first I thought maybe it was a plane or the reflection of something from on the ground. Jess hadn't noticed them yet, so I didn't say anything. After hours on the road, I wondered if fatigue was setting in, but with each passing moment, the lights grew increasingly vibrant. They didn't flicker like airplane lights, nor did they move like anything I had ever encountered before. Rather than soaring through the sky like an airplane, they hovered in one spot before shifting their position. In an unexpected twist that challenged all reasoning, they changed their stance. I chose not to respond. I found myself completely absorbed, observing as the lights abruptly separated, drifting apart in various directions, only to come to a halt, perfectly motionless. Their movements carried an unsettling quality that was hard to ignore. Swift, seamless, and yet empty. Similar to previous experiences, I pressed the accelerator with a bit of urgency, eager to create some space between us and whatever lurked beyond. Jess gazed at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "What's your take on it?" "Text, I'm not sure," I confessed, "but it certainly is strange, isn't it?" She nodded, her lip caught between her teeth as her gaze returned to the lights. "Yes, very weird." We kept driving in silence for a few minutes, stealing occasional glances at the lights. Didn't seem to get closer, but they didn't disappear either. It was like they were keeping up with us, staying just out of reach, but close enough to make us notice their presence. And then the car's engine started to fail. I frowned and looked at the dashboard. The lights flashed, the radio went out for a second, the car jerked like something had drained its power. Suddenly my heart jumped and I let go of the accelerator, hoping it was just a momentary failure. But it happened again. The car stuttered. The headlights dimmed and the engine made a low, tense sound as if it was struggling to stay on. "What's going on?" Jess asked, her voice rising in panic. "I don't know," I muttered, squeezing the steering wheel. I slowed down, scanning the road for a safe place to stop. We were in middle of nowhere, surrounded by empty fields with no buildings or lampposts in sight. The car shook one last time before the engine completely shut down. We stopped on the road. The only sound was the faint murmur of the wind through the fields. Jess and I were silent for a moment, staring at the dashboard as if that would make the car start up again, but the engine was dead. The headlights had faded to a faint glow before turning off completely. "This can't be happening," Jess whispered, her hands trembling as she tried to check her phone. She picked it up, but her expression twisted in despair when she saw the screen. No signal. I checked my phone too. The same thing. Not a single bar. There was no way to call for help. The knot in my stomach tightened, and I looked back to the field. The lights were still there, floating over the field as if they were watching us, and now, without the sound of the engine or the music of the radio, the silence around us felt oppressive. I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door out into the cold night air. Jess looked at me in a panic. "What are you doing?" "I'm going to check the engine," I said, even though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to. I opened the hood and leaned over, shining my phone's flashlight on the engine. Everything seemed normal. There was no smoke, no signs of overheating, but that didn't explain why the car had suddenly shut down. Jess let out a gasp from within the car. "Oh my God, they're getting closer." I sprang up and gazed across the expanse of the field. The lights glided gently, yet with undeniable clarity. The lights drifted closer, their radiant brilliance shining even more fiercely than ever. The lights came close enough for me to see them flicker and pulsate, casting long shadows on the field. The air around us felt dense, laden with something I couldn't explain, and then as suddenly as they appeared, the lights stopped. They remained floating about 50 m away. Jess and I held our breath, waiting, and one by one they started to rise, disappearing into the sky. Seconds later, the car came to life. The engine roared. The lights came back on. Jess looked at me. "Drive. I didn't need you to repeat it to me." I sped up and didn't stop until I got to the next town. Even today, when I drive down that road, I can't help but look out over the fields, hoping to see those lights again. Music. There's a strange sense of calm when you're driving alone at night. It's just you, the empty road, and the buzz of the tires against the asphalt. It's peaceful until it's no longer, until something makes you realize how isolated you really are. That's what happened to me one night when I decided to pull up at a rest area in the middle of nowhere, thinking it would just be a quick break. I didn't expect I'd been driving for hours trying to get home after a weekend away. It was late past midnight, and the road had been deserted for miles. No cars, no lights, just the occasional glare from the signs as I passed by. I felt the tiredness building up in my eyes, so when I saw a sign indicating a rest area, I decided to stop. It would only be a moment to stretch my legs, maybe grab a soda, and be on my way. The rest area had nothing special, just a small parking lot with a couple of vending machines and a restroom, the kind of place you stop when there's no other option. I parked under one of the dim lights that flashed on the pavement and turned off the engine. The cold air hit me as soon as I got out of the car. It was that kind of biting cold that is only felt in really secluded places. I wrapped myself in my jacket and walked to the vending machines, hoping to find something to. I kept awake, and then I saw him. At first I thought he was alone, but when I approached the machines, I noticed a figure standing right at the edge of the light, leaning against the bathroom wall. He was tall, with his hands deep into the pockets of a long, dark coat. The hood of the coat covered most of his face, but I could feel his gaze on me. I stopped, with my heart pounding a little faster. There was something about the way he was there, so motionless, so quiet, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just watched me. I tried to ignore the feeling of discomfort as I pulled out my wallet and stuffed a couple of bills into the vending machine. I could feel his eyes on me all the time. My hands were shaking slightly as I pressed the button for a can. The sound of the can falling into the machine tray seemed too loud in the stillness of the night. I quickly picked it up and turned to go back to my car, hoping I could get out of there without any interaction. But just as I took a step, the man spoke. "Long night." His voice was low, rough, and made me shudder. I stopped, looking in his direction, not wanting to seem too tense. He kept going there with my face hidden in the shadows. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just passing by." He didn't say anything at first, letting the silence stretch in an awkward way, and then with a softer tone, he asked another question. "Where are you going?" Something in the way he said it made my stomach turn. It wasn't just the question, it was like he did it. Like he already knew the answer, and I was just waiting for him to confirm it. "To go home," I replied, staying vague. The man tilted his head slightly for the first time. He saw a glimpse of his face under the hood. His eyes were too wide, too fixed on me, as if he were studying me. "You shouldn't have stopped here," whispered his voice, barely audible. A shiver ran down my spine. "What?" He tilted his head even more, as if he was hearing something I couldn't hear. "This place is not safe." My pulse quickened. Every part of my instinct told me to get in my car and get out of there, but I had to ask, "Why do you say that?" The man didn't respond right away. For a moment he just stood there motionless, and then, in a more urgent tone, he said, "Go now." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I didn't wait any longer. I turned quickly and walked to my car. My keys already in my hand, my breathing quickened as I opened the door, and I slid into the seat, locking. As soon as I was inside, I looked out of the windshield, expecting to see the man still standing there. But he was no longer there. He had faded into the darkness. My pulse was hammering in my ears as I started the engine and left the rest station as fast as I could without losing control of the car. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was watching me. I drove without stopping for another hour, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. But then I heard the news about an hour after I left. There was an accident on the same road. A car lost control and crashed into the trees near the rest area. The driver didn't survive. They said he probably fell asleep at the wheel, exhausted from the trip. And since that day I haven't been able to stop wondering if I wouldn't have stopped if I hadn't talked to that stranger, if he hadn't warned me to leave. It would have been me in the accident. I don't know who that man was or how he knew. But since that night I've never stopped in a lonely rest area, and I never will. It all started with a call in the middle of the night that wakes you up suddenly with a feeling of inexplicable dread that clings to your chest even before you answer. I don't know why I answered. I didn't even recognize the number, but something in the insistence of the tone made me feel like I should do it, as if it was more than a simple call. I wish I hadn't done it. I wish I had let it ring. The voice on the other end was just a whisper far away, muffled as if I was speaking through a bad connection or from far away. At first I didn't understand the words well, but the tone was unmistakable. It was fear. "Help me," said the voice. "Please help me." I sat up in bed, wide awake, feeling my heart beat against my ribs. "Who is it?" I asked. But there was no answer. Just the soft crackle of static and a gasping breath. For a moment I thought it was a joke, but something in that raw fear felt all too real. "Who are you?" I insisted louder. This time the line was cut. I sat in the dark, the phone still stuck to my ear, trying to shake off the feeling that something was very wrong. Maybe it was just a wrong call. Someone in danger, dialing the wrong number. Yes, it had to be that, but the way they said, "Help me," stayed with me long after I ended the call. The next night the call came back, the same unknown number. The same chill running down my spine. This time I didn't hesitate to answer. "Hello." There was a pause, followed by the same sound of static and heavy breathing. "Please," whispered the voice, "help me." My stomach sank. "Who are you? Where are you?" The static intensified for a moment, and then the voice came back, shaky and broken. "No, I don't know. I'm trapped." An icy chill ran down my spine. "Trapped? Where is it?" "Dark," whispered the voice. "I'm afraid." The air in my room seemed to get colder suddenly. It didn't make sense. How could anyone not know where I was? "Tell me, how did you get there?" I insisted. "Can you see anything?" There was a long silence, broken just by the sound of his breath, ragged. And then he said something that turned my stomach. "Don't let him find me. Please don't let him find me." My hands tightened around the phone. "What's looking for you?" But the call was cut off. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't get those words out of my head. "Don't let him find me." The next morning I tried to forget him, convince myself that it was just someone playing with me, or a very elaborate joke, but the fear in that voice, that was real. And the worst thing was that deep down I felt that somehow that call had been for me, as if of all the people in the world I was the only one who could hear it. As the night fell, the call returned. "It's closer," the voice murmured. The moment I picked up, a chill ran through my skin. "What's closer?" The breathing on the other side became erratic. "I can't see it, but I know it's here. It's right outside." Fear took over me. "Tell me, where are you? Can I help you?" "I don't have time left," he whispered. "Don't let him in." What does that mean? Don't let him in? What? The static became deafening. Don't let him in. The voice broke into a soy. Don't let him in. The call was cut off, and then I heard him, a loud thud from my apartment door. I froze. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The sound came again, a deliberate slow knock. I got out of bed with tense muscles, my phone still in my hand. I took a step towards the door, and my mind screamed not to do it. The words of the voice echoed in my head. "Don't let him in." The knock was repeated, this time louder. I slowly approached the door. Everything in my body told me not to look through the peephole, but I did. The light in the hallway was dim, and there, standing in front of me at my door, there was something. Not a person, not exactly. It was a tall silhouette, motionless, the shape of a man, but his face wasn't right. It wasn't blurry or dark, just wrong. Something inside me screamed that I shouldn't see him any longer, but it was too late, because he moved. He turned his head slowly, as if he knew I was watching him, and then he smiled. I walked away from the door so fast that I stumbled and fell to the ground. The bang sounded again, and this time the doorknob moved. I covered my mouth so as not to make noise, my chest rising and falling in short, desperate breaths. "Don't let it in." I closed my eyes and prayed it would go away. The knocking continued for what seemed like hours, and then silence. I didn't open the door. I didn't Sleep. I stood there on the floor with my back against the wall until the first rays of the sun filtered through the window. When I finally mustered up the courage to look through the peephole again, there was no one, but something was wrong. Something had changed. I slid my phone off the floor and checked my call history. The number that had been calling me all those nights didn't exist since then. Every night when the clock strikes midnight, I sit down and wait for the call that doesn't come anymore. But sometimes in the stillness of the night, I still hear the knocks on the door, knocks that sound like someone is waiting for you to finally let them in. There's a kind of silence that you can only find in the deep forest. It's a silence that envelopes you, heavy and dense, where the usual sounds of nature, the singing of birds, the buzz of insects, whisper of the wind between the leaves disappear completely. That was the silence that surrounded me when I camped in a remote area of the national forest. I was miles away from any trail, completely alone, or at least that's what I thought. I've done many solo hikes. It's my way of disconnecting from the world, of getting away from the constant noise of work and people. I've always felt at home in nature. Just me, the trees, and the trees. Stars. This trip was not going to be any different. I arrived early in the afternoon with my backpack full of provisions and a well-marked map. I found a perfect clearing to pitch my tent and spent the afternoon exploring the area. The sun was shining. The air was cool and the forest seemed vibrant with life. I even saw a group of servants near a stream, exactly what I needed. When night fell, I lit a fire and I enjoyed the calm of the forest. The crackling of the fire and the night breeze were my only company. I felt completely at peace, but as the hours passed and the flames began to go out, I noticed something strange. The forest was quiet, too quiet. There were no crickets, there was no rustling of branches in the distance, nothing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I told myself it wasn't nothing. I was just imagining things. But then I heard it, a rustling sound, as if someone stepped on a branch just out of reach of the firelight. I stood motionless. It could have been a deer, or maybe a raccoon, curious about the smell of my food. But as I listened more carefully, I noticed something unsettling. The footsteps weren't erratic, they were slow, deliberate, as if someone was circling my camp. My pulse quickened. I took my flashlight and turned it on, quickly pointing it at the trees. Nothing. Only shadows, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I added fuel to the fire, letting the flames rise again. If there was an animal out there, I expected the fire to scare it away. The sound stopped. I stayed awake for hours, listening, waiting for something else to move, but nothing happened. Eventually fatigue overcame me, and I went into the tent, securing the zipper before going to bed. But I didn't sleep well. Every little sound made me burst my eyes open with my heart pounding, until sometime in the early morning I was woken up by something else. Footsteps, not in the distance, not in the trees, just outside my tent. My breath stopped. Footsteps were slow, barely noticeable on the Araska leaf. My mind was trying to find a logical explanation. A bear, a coyote, a deer, but no animal I knew moved that way with such a human rhythm. I stood still, flashlight in hand, finger shaking over the switch. Then I heard it, the tent zipper not moving, but something touching it, as if it was testing if it was closed. My stomach shrank into a knot of sheer terror. I turned on the flashlight in a desperate motion, and I directed it towards the wall of the store. Nothing, but the sounds had stopped. I stood there, shaking, not daring to move. After what seemed like hours, the sun began to peek over the horizon, and with the daylight, the feeling of being watched disappeared. I left the store, hoping to find traces, some sign that something or someone had been there, but the floor was intact, as if nothing had happened. It's been like I'd imagined it all, but I know what I heard, I know what I felt. I wasn't alone in that forest, and worst of all, whoever was there wanted to get in. I packed my things as fast as I could and got out of there without looking back. I didn't camp alone again after that night, and every time I hear a zipper open in the dark, I wonder if I'll ever come back to hear that sound. But this time from the inside, there's a particular feeling that takes over you when your car breaks down in the middle of nowhere. It's as if all the security you felt inside that metal bubble suddenly evaporates, leaving you exposed, vulnerable. That's exactly what I felt the night my car decided to die on a lonely stretch of road miles from any town or gas station. The sun had already set below the horizon, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon and the emergency lights flashing in the darkness. I had been driving for hours. Returning from a weekend at a friend's cabin, I had decided to take the scenic route on country roads, which at the time seemed like a mistake to me. It had been over an hour since I spotted another car, and naturally, my phone was devoid of any signal. Timeless, isn't it? There I was stranded far from anywhere with no way to call for help and no idea what was wrong with the engine. I tried to start the car for the 10th time. The engine made that muffled and sad sound again. But it didn't turn on. I sighed, letting myself fall into the seat, looking at the empty road in front of me and wondering how long I would be stuck there. And that's when I saw the headlights. At first they were just a flash in the distance, but they were there. A relief ran through my body. Maybe someone could take me to the nearest town, or at least let me use their phone to call a tow truck. I got out of the car and stood by the side of the road, waving my arms as the vehicle approached. It was an old battered truck that stopped a few feet away from me. The engine, he purred softly as the driver rolled down the window. He was a man in his 40s or 50s with a faded baseball cap and a worn jacket. His face was in shadow, but what little I could see was enough to notice that he had a serious expression without much emotion. "Problems with the car?" he asked hoarsely, but not unpleasantly. I nodded. "Yes, he just died. I can't turn it back on, and I don't have a signal on the phone." The man looked at my car and then looked back at me. "Do you want me to take a look at it?" I hesitated for a moment. Something about the way he asked the question made me hesitate, but I quickly dismissed the concern. I was stranded, and he was offering me help. What other option did I have? "Yes, that would be great. Thank you." He got out of the truck and walked to my car, lifting the hood and shining a flashlight on the engine. I stood to the side, trying not to get in the way, but I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. The way the light from his flashlight flickered on the engine and his silence as he checked the car made the night seem even darker, even quieter. "It looks like your alternator is damaged," he said after a minute. "That's why it won't start." I had no idea what that meant. I was never good with cars, so I just nodded, hoping it sounded logical. "It's reparable." "No, here," he replied, closing the hood with a thud. "You'll need a tow truck." "Great. Just what I needed. I can take you to the nearest town," he offered, pointing to his pickup truck. "It's about 20 miles from here." I hesitated again. 20 miles? That was pretty far away, especially in the middle of the night. But what, I wasn't going to get anywhere by staying there with a dead car. "Yes, okay," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'd appreciate it very much." The man nodded and motioned for me to get into the truck. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and slid into the vehicle. The worn leather creaked under my weight. The inside smelled slightly of old cigarettes and motor oil, but it was warm, and that comforted me a little. The truck roared as it started, and we merged onto the dark road. The silence between us was dense, and the only thing we were what could be heard was the murmur of the engine, and the occasional creak of the suspension as it went over bumps in the road. I looked out the window, seeing the blurry trees under the dim glare of the headlights, trying to ignore the growing uneasiness in my stomach. "Do you live around here?" I asked, trying to break the tension. He shrugged without taking his eyes off the road. "Not far away." I waited for him to say something else, but it didn't. The silence grew heavier than before. As we drove, I noticed something strange. The road didn't seem to take us anywhere. There were no signs. There were no mile markers. There was no sign of a town in the distance. Just endless trees on either side. My uneasiness grew with each passing minute. "How long is it until the village is left?" I inquired, making an effort to maintain a calm tone. The man didn't answer right away. He just kept driving with his eyes fixed on the road. Finally, he spoke with a strange tone in his voice. "We're almost there." It was at that moment that my discomfort turned into a real fear. We'd been driving too long. If the village was really 20 miles away, we should have seen something by now. I couldn't see any light on the horizon. No trace of civilization. Just the black road stretching endlessly in front of us. I swallowed. I salivated hard. "You know what I think? I should go back to my car," I said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe I'll just wait until morning to call a tow truck." The man didn't say anything for a moment. Then he slowly slowed down the truck and pulled over to the side of the road. I sighed with relief. But then suddenly he reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Are you sure you want to get you down here?" he whispered. "There's no one for miles around. No one's going to find you here." Panic ran through me like lightning. His hand squeezed for another second, and then as suddenly as he had grabbed me, he let go of me. "Do what you want," he said in a deadpan voice, leaning back in his seat. I didn't wait another second. I opened the door and jumped out of the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I closed the door suddenly, and I walked away a few steps, watching him cautiously. The man sat there looking at me from the gloom of the cabin, and then without saying anything else, he stepped on the accelerator and disappeared into the darkness. I stood on the icy road with the echo of the engine still ringing in my ears. I never knew what intentions I had, but I don't want to know either. From that night, I made a new rule. If your car breaks down in out of nowhere, be careful who you accept help with. 'Cause sometimes getting a ride can be more dangerous than getting stranded. There's something about the camp that makes you feel like you're out of time. The fire crackles, the stars shine on you, and the stillness of the forest envelopes you. It's a peace that isn't found in the city, where the noise never stops completely. That's why my friends and I tried to make these trips to the woods as often as possible. But there was one excursion in particular, the last one we took, that still haunts me. Not because of the tranquility or the beauty of the scenery, but because of what happened during the long, dark hours when the fire was extinguished and the night became too quiet. That weekend there were just 3 of us. Matt, Kyle and I chose a camp deep within out of the woods, miles from the nearest town, right next to a small secluded lake. It was perfect. There were no other campers around, just trees and water as far as the eye could see. We pitched the tents, lit the fire, and spent the day fishing and joking around as we always did. Everything seemed normal, and by the time the sun started to set we were feeling relaxed and ready to enjoy the night. When the darkness fell, the temperature mat was in the middle of a ridiculous ghost story when we heard the first noise, a faint rustling among the trees, beyond the glow of the fire. At first we all thought it was a raccoon or maybe a deer moving through the brush. "Did you hear that?" Kyle asked, squinting to look into the darkness. "It's probably an animal," I said, even though I was already there, straining to hear any other sound. The forest had been calm all afternoon, and now that night had fallen completely. Every noise felt amplified. Matt ignored it with a laugh. "Dude, we're in the middle of the forest. Of course there are animals," we all agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The crunch stopped, but the hairs on the back of my neck were still standing on end. The flames of the fire danced, casting long shadows that seemed to move between the trees, and for the first time since we arrived, the forest felt a little too still. We tried to ignore it and kept chatting, but the atmosphere had changed. Every few minutes I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see something or someone lurking just outside the glow of the fire. After a while we decided to go to sleep. The fire was going out, and the air was getting colder and colder. We put out the coals, put the food away, and went into our tents. I settled inside my sleeping bag, listening to the faint rustle of the trees outside, trying to calm the feeling of unease that settled in my stomach. And then the footsteps began. At first I thought I was imagining them, a slight crunch, a rhythmic and soft sound, as if someone was walking slowly on the dry leaves. My heart raced, and I held my breath, concentrating on the sound. It was faint but unmistakable, footsteps moving out of the tents. I sat up carefully, reaching for the flashlight I had left next to my sleeping bag. I hesitated for a second, not wanting to wake Matt or Kyle if it was silly. But the sound continued. It wasn't an animal. Animals don't walk like that. I slipped out of the sack and opened the tent enough to poke his head out, shining the flashlight on the space beyond our camp. The ace of light cut through the darkness, but I saw nothing. There was no movement, no silhouette among the trees, but the footsteps went on around the camp. They didn't get any closer, but they didn't move away either. They were slow, methodical, as if someone was walking in circles. I crawled out of the tent and went to Matt's, touching the tarp softly. "Matt," I whispered, "awake." It took a moment, but finally the zipper opened and Matt's head appeared. "What's up?" "Listen." He was silent with his frown furrowed, and then he heard it. His eyes widened and he nodded, now wide awake. We woke Kyle up, and the 3 of us stood in the middle of the camp, flashlights in hand, listening. The footsteps were still there, following the same pattern, surrounding us. "We should shout something," Kyle whispered, his voice tense. "Maybe it's someone lost or playing a joke on us." But none of us dared to speak out loud. There was something about the way the footsteps sounded in their relentless rhythm that gave me goose bumps. It wasn't someone lost. It wasn't a joke. They were watching us, and suddenly the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. My heart was pounding in my ears as we stood there motionless, waiting for something to happen. "It's okay," Matt whispered, his tense voice. "Let's go back to the tents tomorrow. As soon as we wake up we'll leave." I nodded, but when I got back to my tent I couldn't sleep. Every little rustle of the branches, every whisper of the wind pushed me to the limit. Hours passed in a tense and agonizing silence. I don't know what time I fell asleep, but at some point I must have, because when I woke up it was already dawn, and for a moment I thought it had all been a product of my imagination, until I heard it again. This time it wasn't footsteps, it was a breath, a low, slow sound coming right outside my tent. My eyes burst open and I stood completely still. The breath was deep, measured someone or something was standing right outside. I didn't dare move. I didn't want him to know I was awake. I just heard every muscle in my tense body as my mind tried to find an explanation. After what seemed like an eternity, the breathing stopped. There was a long silence, and then again the footsteps, but this time they were moving away. I breathed again, feeling the cold sweat on my skin. I waited until I was sure the sound had disappeared before I opened the store carefully. Matt and Kyle were already awake, packing in silence. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. We knew we had heard it. We knew that something had been there. We put our things away as quickly as possible and got out of the woods. The trail felt different, less welcoming, more oppressive. I didn't stop looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us, but the forest was empty, as if whatever haunted us during the night had disappeared in the sunlight. We never talked about that trip again. It's not like we made a pact of silence, just know we wanted to remember. But I'll never forget that night, the footsteps circling each other, our breath right outside my tent, and I haven't camped since. The serene moments aboard a cruise ship have always captivated me, where time stands still and the ocean unfolds infinitely, creating a sense of drifting between two realms. It's a tranquility unlike any other, enveloped by sheer solitude. What water and sky! That's why I was thrilled when my girlfriend Emily booked a week-long cruise. We needed a break and couldn't wait to enjoy that feeling of serene seclusion. What I didn't expect was how unsettling that same silence could become when something or someone wasn't quite right. The second night on the boat was when I first noticed it. We were in the dining room with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of cutlery filling the air when my gaze wandered around the room and stopped on an old lady sitting alone. She wasn't eating or talking to anyone. I was just there looking at her hands. Her white hair was neatly pulled back in a way that seemed too formal for the relaxed atmosphere of the place. What struck me most was how motionless she was in the middle of so much activity. It seemed frozen as a statue. "Time," I whispered to Emily, leaning slightly towards her and pointing in the woman's direction. Emily glanced and frowned slightly. "Yes, it's kind of sad. Maybe she's waiting for someone." "Maybe," I murmured, though something didn't seem right. I couldn't stop looking at her. The other tables were full of couples and families, chatting and laughing, but she was all alone. Not even a waiter came to serve her. We finished dinner and left the dining room, not thinking much more about the woman that night. I assumed she was simply a lone traveler, or someone who had lost her companion on the trip. Sad wasn't entirely unusual, but the next night when we got back to dinner, she was still there in the same seat, wearing the same clothes, looking at her hands in exactly the same way. "That's weird," I muttered, leaning over to Emily. "She's still sitting there." Emily shrugged her shoulders. "Maybe she likes that place." I wasn't convinced. There was something about the way she was sitting so perfectly still that it gave me a strange feeling, and once again, no one seemed to pay attention to her. Not the waiters or the other passengers. No one for the rest of the night. I couldn't get her image out of my head. It was like she didn't fit in. The boat was full of life. Poolside parties, karaoke in the lounge, even live music in the bar. But she wasn't a part of any of it. She was just there on the periphery, existing in her own silent world. The next day, we spent most of our time lounging by the pool and exploring the boat. It was a beautiful day, and for a while I forgot the woman, but later that afternoon, as we headed to one of the lower decks for a drink, I saw her again. She was sitting alone on a bench near a window, looking out over the ocean. The light of the setting sun cast long shadows down the hallway, and her figure was bathed in a golden glow that somehow made her look even more out of place. Once again, she wasn't moving. She was just there with the same empty expression staring at her. "It's the third time I've seen her," I whispered to Emily, feeling a knot of unease form in my stomach. "Always alone, never talking to anyone." Emily took a look at her, but she didn't seem so disturbed like me. "Maybe she's just shy or just likes to be alone. There's people like that." I nodded, but the feeling didn't go away. The boat was full of life, but she seemed disconnected from everything, like a ghost just passing by. That night after dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about her. As we walked back to our cabin, I decided to ask a crew member about her. A young woman in uniform near the elevator, and I stopped her. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound casual. "There's an older woman I've seen several times on the boat. She's always sitting alone, white hair, dressed smartly. Do you know if she's okay?" The crew's smile faded for a second, but it was enough for her to notice it. She looked around before replying. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not sure who you're referring to. We have a lot of passengers on board." Frown. "You've been in the dining room the last 2 nights." Always in the same place. The crew member gave me a tense smile. I'll take note to check, but if you don't mind, we asked the guests to respect the privacy of other passengers. Her answer didn't convince me. It was too vague, as if she was trying to get rid of me, but I didn't insist. Emily was already pulling my arm, urging me to let it go. Just forget it, she told me as soon as we got to the cabin. It's probably okay, you're exaggerating, but I couldn't forget it. The next night, I insisted on sitting near her table in the dining room. I wanted to see her up close. Maybe even strike up a conversation if I talked to her. Maybe my mind would settle. Maybe after all, I was just a lone traveler. When we walked into the dining room, life immediately in the same chair, at the same table, wearing the same clothes. I guided Emily to a table just a few feet away, close enough to observe her without being too obvious. She hadn't moved since we arrived. Her hands rested gently on the table, her head slightly tilted as if she were deep in thought. We ordered our food, but I spent most of the dinner staring at her out of the corner of my eye. The more I watched her, the more disturbing she became. It wasn't just her immobility that disturbed me. It was the fact that no one else seemed to notice her. The waiters passed by her table without stopping. The other passengers didn't even take a look at her, as if it didn't exist. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, determined to come over and say something, even if it was a simple good night. But when I got to her table, I stopped in my tracks. Her chair was empty. I blinked. Sure, I'd seen her there just moments before. I looked around, but there was no sign of her. The dining room was still full of people, but the woman had disappeared without a trace. I turned to Emily, who was watching me wide-eyed. What happened? Where did she go? No, I don't know, I stammered, feeling the air in the room get heavier. She was right here. We quickly left the dining room, both uneasy about her sudden disappearance. For the rest of the cruise, I never saw her again, but I never stopped feeling that she was still there, somewhere on the ship, watching, waiting. Middle of the night that always feels a little weird. The bright lights casting long shadows, the eerie silence, and the feeling that time itself has slowed down. I've been a truck driver for over 10 years, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, but nothing, not even the countless empty highways or foggy mountain passes, prepared me for what I experienced that night. I had been driving non-stop for almost 14 hours, and exhaustion was hitting me hard. My eyes were heavy, my hands stiff on the steering wheel, and the endless stretch of road in front of me seemed like it was never going to end. I knew I needed to stop, get some sleep, or at least have a cup of coffee to hold on until my next destination. That's when I saw it, a truck stop shining like a lighthouse in the distance, its fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness. It wasn't on my usual route, but in the middle of nowhere you take what you find. I turned on the turn signal, slowed down, and pulled into the parking lot. My truck rumbled as it stopped near the edge of the lot. When I got out of the cab, I was greeted by the cool night air, but something in the place felt off. It was too quiet. Sure, there were a few other trucks parked here and there, probably with their drivers asleep in the cabs, but there wasn't a single soul walking around. The gas pumps were abandoned. The convenience store had a dim light, but no movement was visible inside. The only sound was the faint hum of my truck cooling. I shook off the feeling of unease. I'd been on the road too long. That's it, my mind was playing tricks on me. I needed to stretch the legs, have a coffee, and maybe sleep for an hour or two before continuing to drive. I headed to the convenience store. The fluorescent lights flickered above my head as I walked through the automatic doors. The place was empty as I expected, and the cold air inside hit me like a wall. There was a cashier behind the counter, but it didn't move. He didn't even look up when I walked in. I was hunched over with my face hidden under a baseball cap and hands clasped on the counter as if I was deep in thought. "Good night," I muttered as I made my way to the coffee machine. There was no response. The machine spat out the last traces of coffee in my cup, great warm and stale coffee. I took a sip and grimaced. Still better than nothing. I grabbed a pack of gum and a bottle of water from the shelves, and I went to the counter. The cashier didn't move. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. I left the items on the counter waiting for me to cash them, but the silence lengthened. "Hey friend," I said, now louder with a tone of frustration. "Are you okay?" Finally, he moved slowly, tilted his head just enough that I could see a flash of his face. His eyes, there was something wrong with them. They were dull, almost lifeless, as if he wasn't completely there. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me for a moment before moving his hands with a stiff and mechanical gesture, scanning my items. The feeling of unease came back with more force. Suddenly, I wanted to get out of there. I went back to my truck and put as much distance as possible between me and that place. I left some bills on the counter, grabbed my things, and hurried out without waiting for change. As I walked away, I heard a faint sound behind me, a low, distorted hum. Almost like static, I looked over my shoulder expecting to see the cashier manipulating a radio or something. But he was just there, completely motionless. His hands on the counter and my head tilted slightly to one side. The sound of static increased as if coming from the walls themselves. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I hurried out of the store with my heart pounding and headed back to my truck. The parking lot felt even more deserted than before. The lights cast long, strange shadows that seemed to move as I walked. I climbed into the cab, I locked the doors, and sat there for a moment trying to figure out what was going on. Trying to get rid of the restlessness that had taken hold of me, I started the engine, hoping the familiar sound would calm my nerves. It didn't. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't help but glance at the rearview mirror. The convenience store was still there, glowing under the hard lights, but something caught my eye. On the edge from the lot, right at the edge of the shadows, was a figure standing. It was hard to make out details, but it looked like a person standing completely motionless, facing in my direction. A shiver ran down my spine. I pressed the accelerator, eager to get back on the road, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there watching until the store and parking lot completely disappeared from my sight. I told myself I was exaggerating, that I was tired, running on the last reserves of energy, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. But as the miles went by, the feeling of dread didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. The next few hours were a blur. The road stretched out before me, dark and empty, with occasional signs passing by in the light of the headlights. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't going to happen. It was okay that I wasn't alone. There are certain experiences that are never forgotten. No matter how much time passes, they get stuck in the back of your mind, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface when you least expect it. For me, it was the year I spent in college, sharing an apartment with a guy that no one else seemed to remember. At first I thought it was all in my head, maybe I was misunderstanding things, but the longer you expect it, it was my sophomore year when I decided to move off campus to a small 2-bedroom apartment. The place wasn't a big deal. Cheap rent, worn carpets, and a direct view of the parking lot. But it was better than the dorms, and I was excited to have my own space. When I signed the contract, I was informed that I would have a roommate. His name was David. Supposedly, he had already been living there for a year. That was fine with me. I had always gotten along with my roommates in the past, so I didn't expect problems. The first few weeks were normal. David was reserved. He spent most of his time in his room and only went out occasionally to go to the kitchen or bathroom. We greeted each other, but we never talked too much. I didn't think much about it. Some people they are quieter. Maybe he was busy with school or something else. But then things started to feel strange. First, they were small details. I would come home from campus and find his bedroom door ajar, even though I never saw him leave or heard sounds at night. Soft whispers, almost imperceptible, always came from his room. Even when I thought he wasn't home, I tried to ignore him. Maybe I was imagining things, or maybe the walls of the apartment were thin and the sound was coming from the neighbors. But then one night everything changed. That night I was late from the library. The apartment was pitch black. David had his door locked as usual. I didn't want to disturb him, so I went straight to my room. But as I walked through his door, I noticed something strange. A light came out from underneath. It wasn't the warm glow of a lamp or a light bulb. It was dim, flickering like it came from a screen. I paused for a moment, debating whether to touch or move on, but something in me told me not to do it. The apartment was too quiet. All I could hear was the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I waited a moment longer and decided to let it go. What David did in his room was none of my business. The next morning I woke up early to go to class. I walked past his room and stopped dead. The door was wide open and the room was completely empty. The bed was made, the desk clear. There wasn't a sign that anyone had slept there. It was like no one had used the room in weeks. I stood on the threshold in confusion. Maybe David had left early, maybe he had an early morning class, but why did it seem like I'd never been here in the first place? Later that day, I ran into a friend, Sarah, in the campus cafeteria. We got chatting, and at some point I mentioned David. Do you know him? I asked. She frowned. David? Who is David? My roommate, I said, laughing a little. He's lived with me the last few months. Sarah looked at me like she was joking. I thought I lived alone. I froze. No, I definitely have a roommate. Sarah shook her head. You've never mentioned anyone named David. The conversation left me uneasy. How was it possible that Sarah didn't know about him? We'd been friends for years. I definitely mentioned him before. No. Over the next few weeks things only got stranger. David's presence became inconsistent. Some days I'd come home and it seemed like there was no one in the apartment. No noise in his room. No extra dishes in the sink. Nothing. Other days I saw him fleetingly moving around the apartment, but we never talked. He was never there for long. It was like he was fading away, like he'd never been there in the first place. One night after a long day of school, I had dinner with some friends. The conversation drifted into the topic of roommates, and again I mentioned David, but this time the reaction was worse. David asked one of my friends, putting his fork down on the table, "Have you lived with anyone all this time?" "Yes," I said, feeling a knot in my stomach. "I've mentioned them before, haven't you?" Everybody shook their heads. "You've never mentioned anyone else," said another, frowning. "We've always assumed you live alone." A shiver ran down my spine. How could I make that possible? I was sure I'd talked about David before, at least I thought I had, but the more they insisted that I'd never mentioned him, the more I began to doubt myself. I was imagining it. That night when I got to the apartment, I stood in front of David's door. I had to talk to him. I had to confirm that I wasn't going crazy. I turned slowly the doorknob, and I pushed it open. The room was empty, not just empty, like no one had lived there in months. The closet was completely empty, the desk without a single object on top of it, the white walls, the bed without sheets. It was like there had never been a David. I took a step back, feeling a knot of fear forming in my stomach. It couldn't be true. David had been here. I had seen him. We had talked. We had shared the apartment. Right? But there was no sign of him. Not a single proof that he had ever existed. The next morning, I went to the building management office. I needed answers. When I asked for my roommate, the woman behind the desk looked at me in confusion. "David," she repeated, flipping through the files. "There's no one with that name on your lease." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible," I said, my voice just a whisper. "He's been living with me all this time." She's shaken her head, her serious expression. "I'm sorry, but according to our records, you've been living there alone since you moved in." I never heard David again, but some nights when the house is quiet, I still hear soft footsteps, a creak at the door, like someone was still there, like David was never gone. I've had that feeling in my stomach, that silent warning that something's wrong before you really know what it is. It's like your body knows something before your mind, and the only thing you can do is trust your gut. That's exactly what I felt when we arrived at that empty campsite. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend in the woods, just me and a couple of friends, but from the moment we arrived, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It started with something small, like a whisper in the back of my mind, telling me that the place had something strange. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on exactly, and I didn't want to be the person to ruin the trip with paranoia. But as we unloaded the car and set up the tents, the feeling only grew. We had driven a few hours out of the city, into a national forest where trees stretched for miles, and the sound of civilization was far behind. The camp wasn't on any official map, but Kyle, one of my best friends, had found it online on some outdoor enthusiast forum. He said it was off the beaten path, perfect for disconnecting from it all. Peace, tranquility, no other campers or distractions, but standing there surrounded only by trees. The silence didn't seem peaceful to me, it seemed heavy to me. "It's great," didn't Kyle say with a smile, throwing a bag of firewood on the ground. "We have the whole place to ourselves." "Yes," I replied, trying to sound excited. "It's definitely secluded." Emily, my girlfriend, was already taking out the fridge, humming to herself. She didn't seem worried about the loneliness of the place, but anyway, she'd always been more adventurous than me. She loved these trips, the chance to unplug. But I found myself looking around more than usual, scanning the tree line as if I expected to see something. The afternoon passed without incident. We lit a campfire, roasted marshmallows, and laughed, reminiscing about old times, typical of camps. But even as the sun began to set and the glow of the campfire flickered warmly against the trees, I couldn't relax. There was something strange about how quiet the forest was. There were no birds, there were no insects, not even the sound of the wind shaking the branches, just the crackle of our campfire and our voices that seemed too loud in the stillness. "You're so quiet tonight," Emily commented, nudging me playfully. "All right?" "Yes, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." She didn't insist, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Still, we settled into a comfortable routine, spending time with stories and jokes, and eventually I managed to push my restlessness to the back of my mind. But as the night wore on, things started to feel even stranger. Around midnight, we decided to go to sleep. The campfire had been reduced to embers, and the temperature had dropped enough to that the idea of crawling into our sleeping bags sounded more appealing than staying up longer. I closed our tent and lay down next to Emily, staring at the tent fabric as she quickly fell asleep. The forest outside was still deathly quiet, and for some reason I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, I woke up to a sound faint, as if Someone or something was moving outside the store. I sat up immediately, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was subtle, just the soft rustling of leaves and branches under a few feet, but in the absolute silence of the forest it sounded like thunder. I listened, holding my breath, trying to convince myself that it was just Kyle going to the trees to use the bathroom or somewhere. Animal that had come too close to the camp, but the footsteps were too deliberate, too slow. I gently shook Emily to wake her up. "Hey, do you hear that?" she growled softly. "Half asleep? What's anyone outside?" I whispered my barely audible voice. Emily blinked her sleepy brain, trying to catch up. "It's probably Kyle." But I wasn't so sure. I looked up at the little Maya window of the store, but it was too dark to see anything. Campfire had been extinguished hours ago. Leaving the camp in shadows, the footsteps stopped for a long moment. There was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the oppressive stillness of the forest pressing down from all sides. I slowly slid the tent lock, taking care not to make a sound, and stuck my head out. The moon was high, casting a pale light over the camp, but there was no sign of anyone. Kyle's tent, still, it was closed, its silhouette barely visible inside. Whatever had been moving wasn't. I scanned the line of trees, my eyes sweeping over every shadow. Nothing. "Do you see anything?" Emily asked. Now fully awake, I shook my head, still staring into the darkness. "No, but there's something out there." We waited for what seemed like an eternity, listening, but the footsteps didn't come back. After a while, Emily convinced me to lie down again. Though I didn't sleep, I lay wide awake, listening to the silence, waiting for the sound to return. But it never did. When morning came, my anxiety from the night before almost seemed silly. Almost. The forest looked normal again. The discomfort of the night faded, though not quite. Kyle was already awake, stirring the ashes from the campfire, oblivious to the strange tension that hung over Emily and me. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," I lied again. "And you like a rock," he smiled. I didn't tell him about the steps. Now it seemed ridiculous, like maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it really had been just an animal, but that feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. Something had been there, and when we started packing to leave, we knew for sure the path we had come by had disappeared. We stood there dazed, staring at the dense trees where there used to be a clear path. It was like the forest had erased it overnight, like it didn't want us to leave. And in that moment I knew one thing for sure: we hadn't been the first to get lost here, and we probably wouldn't be the last. Have you ever had that feeling in your stomach that something's wrong before you even realize what it is? It's like your body knows something that your mind, it hasn't come to terms yet, and all you can do is trust that instinct. That's exactly how I felt when we arrived at that empty campsite. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend in the woods, just a couple of friends and me, but from the moment we arrived I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It started subtly, like an eye whisper in the back of my mind, telling me that something in this place was wrong. I couldn't pinpoint what exactly, and I didn't want to be the person who ruins a good trip with paranoias, but as we unpacked the car and set up the tents, the feeling only grew stronger. We had driven several hours out of the city into a national forest where trees stretched for miles and the sound of civilization. It was way behind. The camp wasn't on any official map, but Kyle, one of my best friends, had found it on the internet on a hiking enthusiast forum. He said it was secluded, off the beaten path, perfect for disconnecting from it all. In theory, I liked the idea. Peace and quiet, no other campers, no distractions, but standing there, surrounded by nothing but trees, the silence doesn't change. Felt peaceful, felt heavy, pretty cool. Didn't Kyle smile as he threw a bag of firewood on the floor? "We have the whole place to ourselves." "Yes," I replied, trying to sound excited. "Definitely separated." Emily, my girlfriend, was already pulling out the cooler, humming to herself. She didn't seem to be bothered by loneliness, but of course she had always been more adventurous than me. She loved these trips, the opportunity to disconnect. I instead caught myself looking at around me more than usual, scanning the tree line as if hoping to see something. The afternoon passed without incident. We lit a campfire, roasted malvaviscos, and laughed, reminiscing about old times, the typical camping things. But even when the sun began to set and the glow of the campfire warmly illuminated the trees, I couldn't relax. There was something strange about how quiet the forest was. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the wind moving the branches, just the crackle of our campfire and our voices echoing too loudly in the stillness. "You're pretty quiet tonight," Emily said, nudging me with a smile. "Yes, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired, I guess." She didn't insist, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Still, we settled into a quiet rhythm, spending time telling stories and making jokes, and over time I managed to push my restlessness to the back of my mind. But as the night wore on, things started to feel even stranger. Around midnight, we decided to go to sleep. The campfire had been reduced to embers, and the temperature had dropped enough to make crawling into the sleeping bag seem like a better idea than staying awake. I closed our tent and lay down next to Emily, staring at Lona's ceiling while she quickly fell asleep. Outside, the forest was still deathly quiet, and for some reason I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was awakened by a faint sound, as if someone or something was moving outside the store. I sat up suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was subtle, barely perceptible. Only the soft rustle of leaves and branches came down a few feet. But in the absolute stillness of the forest it sounded as loud as thunder. I held my breath and listened, trying to convince myself that it was just Kyle going to the bathroom among the trees, or some animal lurking too close to the camp. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too slow. I gently shook Emily to wake her up. "Hey, do you hear that?" she moaned softly, still half asleep. "What's up? Is there anyone outside?" I whispered, my barely audible voice. Emily blinked, trying to wake up all the way. "It's probably Kyle," but I wasn't so sure. I looked up at the little mesh window of the tent, but it was too dark to see anything. The campfire already, it had completely shut down, leaving the camp shrouded in shadows. The footsteps stopped for a long moment. There was nothing, not a sound, not a movement, just the oppressive silence of the forest surrounding us completely. I slowly unzipped the tent, careful not to make a noise, and poked my head out. The moon was high, casting a pale glow over the camp, but there was no sign of anyone. Kyle's tent was still closed, his silhouette barely visible inside. Whatever it was that had been walking around wasn't him. I scanned the line of trees. My gaze swept over every corner of the darkness, but I saw nothing, just the empty camp and the dark forest beyond. Emily sat up behind me, her voice tense but low. "Do you see anything?" I turned my head slightly, my gaze fixed on the night sky. "While it may not be visible, there's definitely something lurking beyond the surface." We lingered in anticipation, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours, yet the footsteps never returned. Eventually, Emily persuaded me to recline once more. Despite my lack of sleep, I remained wide awake, immersed in the silence, anticipating the return of sound that never arrived. As dawn broke and the sunlight poured in, the worries that had haunted me the night before felt almost trivial. Close, but not quite. The forest appeared to be just as it should be once more. The lingering restlessness from the previous night began to dissipate, though it still clung on just a bit. Kyle was up and about, poking at the campfire ashes, completely unaware of the unease that had enveloped Emily and me. "Good morning," he said with a cheerful smile. They enjoyed a restful night's sleep. Indeed, I found myself being untruthful once more. "And you, much like a log," responded with a smile. I kept the steps to myself. It seemed absurd in hindsight, as if I had conjured it up in my mind, or perhaps it had simply been a fleeting dream. "Did you sleep well? What's going on?" The unease in my stomach lingered on. There was an unmistakable presence. Our intention was to gather everything after breakfast and head back to town. However, as we began packing, an odd realization struck us. The trail we had followed to reach the camp, once so distinct upon our arrival, had vanished entirely. We found ourselves in a state of bewilderment, gazing at the thick foliage where the path ought to have been. I was convinced we had the car. It was merely a brief stroll through the woods, yet now the road had completely vanished. The forest seemed to have swallowed it whole in the blink of an eye, and with night approaching, we feared that if we didn't escape soon, we too would become its next meal. Sometimes, an unsettling sensation envelopes me, a nagging awareness that something is amiss, even when everything seems perfectly within reach. Everything appeared normal at first glance, yet an unsettling chill crept down my spine. A nagging discomfort settled in my stomach, making me question my surroundings. That was my experience on the first night aboard the cruise ship, which was meant to be the most relaxing getaway of my life. Just my husband Tim and I, ready to savor 10 days at sea under clear skies and calm waters. But almost immediately after we set sail, an odd sensation took hold. It started subtly, with little things. The air in the hallways felt oddly stale, despite being out on the open sea. The lights flickered slightly in certain areas of the ship. A distant hum, reminiscent of machinery running endlessly, seemed to permeate the atmosphere, even during moments of quiet. Most unsettling of all, some passengers appeared off-kilter. While many were happy and relaxed, enjoying the trip, a few stood out, their demeanor unsettlingly out of place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, our second night on board unfolded, and the atmosphere began to shift in unsettling ways. After wrapping up our dinner in the main dining room, Tim and I strolled back to our cabin. The corridors were silent. The faint strains of music floated through the air, emanating from the ballroom where an elegant affair was in full swing. Tim made a light-hearted comment about slipping into the party unnoticed, but my thoughts were focused on something entirely different. A sense of unease began to creep in, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It was at that moment I laid eyes on her. A woman in her 70s sits quietly at a small table by the window, enjoying her solitude. She gazed into the depths of the shadowy ocean. Her attire was simple, unlike that of the other passengers who donned more elaborate outfits. She donned a simple, vintage dress, reminiscent of a bygone era. Her skin was strikingly pale, almost ethereal, and her eyes appeared distant, as though she were a world apart from the rest of us. I nudged Tim and pointed in his direction. The time Tim took a look and shrugged her shoulders. She's probably just a widow. Cruise ships attract all kinds of people, but something about her made me uncomfortable. She wasn't moving. She didn't react to anything around her. She just stood there staring at the sea like she was waiting for something. I couldn't get it out of my head. Even after we got back to our cabin, I lay looking at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and moans of the boat as it moved. Through the water, Tim fell asleep right away. But I didn't keep thinking about the woman. Why was she sitting there alone? Because I hadn't looked at anyone. The next day, Timo, we explored more of the boat. It was huge, like a floating city. Shops, restaurants, a small theater. We spent the day sunbathing by the pool, drinking cocktails, enjoying the open sea. By the time night came, I had almost forgotten the woman. Almost after dinner, we walked down the same hallway again as the night before, and my stomach tensed when I saw the same corner by the window. She was still there in the exact same position, in the same clothes, with the same empty expression, as if she hadn't moved in 24 hours. I stopped short. Tim, look at her. He washed and frowned. That's weird. It's like I haven't changed position. Tim swallowed. Maybe he's waiting for someone for more than a day, I whispered. That's when a crew member appeared down the aisle, a young man, probably in his mid-20s, in an impeccable uniform and a polite smile. All right, he asked us, looking at us curiously. I pointed to the woman. We've seen her here 2 nights. Still hasn't budged? Understood. The crewman's smile faltered for a fleeting moment, a subtle hint of unease, before his demeanor softened once more. He glanced swiftly in our direction, then caught sight of us once more. I'm confident he's doing just fine. While some passengers prefer to unwind in the serene corners of the ship, his response left me unconvinced. It seems like it's frozen, I insisted. The man's smile became more tense. I'll make sure someone checks it out, but don't worry, enjoy your night. And with that she turned and walked quickly down the hallway. Tim and I stood there feeling even more uncomfortable than before. I don't like this, I whispered as we kept walking. Tim put an arm around my shoulders. Sure, there's an explanation, don't obsess. But that night I stayed awake, going over everything over and over again. The woman, the fleeting glance of the crew member, the feeling that something was not right on this ship. The next day, I couldn't help myself. I started asking other passengers. I casually mentioned the woman in conversations. Most hadn't noticed her, but an older couple, retirees from Florida, seemed to recognize who she was talking about. Oh, the lady sitting by the window said, the woman, we've seen her several times. Yes, it's strange. Her husband added, she never moves. My stomach tightened. Do you know who it is? The man and woman exchanged a look. We asked a crew member, the woman said, lowering her voice. They told us there's no one on the ship who fits her description. A shiver ran through my body. What did they say? There's no record of a passenger like her. continued the man, but we've seen her just like you. My mind went blank. If she wasn't registered on the ship, who was she? And most importantly, why was the crew pretending she didn't exist that night? I couldn't resist. After dinner, I convinced him to go back to the same hallway, and there she was, exactly the same, in exactly the same position, but this time something changed. When we passed next to her, I heard a soft, barely audible whisper above the sound of the boat gliding over the water. I stopped in my tracks. Did you hear it, Timmy? She looked at here. What? I turned slowly to the woman. Her head was still tilted towards the sea. Her expression was empty, but her mouth was moving. The words were weak, but I managed to hear them. Help! My blood was blown. Her voice was just a whisper like the wind on water. Help me! I froze. Tim grabbed my arm. Let's go now. We walk away quickly without looking back, and at that moment I knew the truth. That woman didn't. I was alive, and I was trapped on this ship. We hurried back to our cabin, closing the door behind us with a dull thud. My hands were shaking as I leaned against the wall, trying to process what we had just seen. Tim, I whispered, not daring to look at him. She spoke. He didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was low and tense. I don't want to talk about this. I looked at him in disbelief. What do you mean you don't want to? A dead woman just asked us for help. Tim rubbed his face with his hands and let out a trembling sigh. We don't know. That maybe it was the wind or your imagination. I walked away from him, shaking my head. Number la. I heard clearly. He said, help me. The silence between us was thick, full of fear and confusion. Finally Tim spoke again. So what do you want to do? I opened my mouth to answer, but I stopped. What could I do? The crew had already lied to us, or they knew something and they were hiding it, or worse yet, they couldn't even see it. I shuddered at the thought of the second option. I finally shook my head. Tomorrow we'll find out more. Tim didn't argue. He got into bed and turned off the light, but neither of us could sleep that night. The next morning, I went straight to the customer service desk. A woman with dark hair and a forced smile attended to us. How can I help them? I cleared my throat. Last night, we saw an older woman in the hallway near the dining room. The employee nodded politely. Yes, there are several older passengers on board. I shook my head. No, this woman we have seen in the same place for 3 nights in a row. He hasn't moved. He hasn't changed his clothes. The woman's smile tightened for a second, but she recovered quickly. And what is her concern exactly? Tim shot me a look as if warning me not to mention it, but I did anyway. Last night she spoke. The clerk blinked but said nothing. She whispered, help me. This time the woman narrowed her eyes and exhaled patiently. Madam, I assure you that if a passenger needs help, the crew will take care of it. So do you know who it is? Silence just for a second, but enough to confirm what I already suspected. Finally the woman forced a smile. Enjoy the rest of your trip. And with that the conversation ended. That night we went back to the same hallway, not because we wanted to. Something drew us there, and as I expected she was still there, but this time it was different, because when we passed by her she raised her head and looked directly at us. Her face was pale, lifeless, her eyes empty. There are certain things that just moved again, and no matter how much longer, experiences that stay in the deepest part of the ice cream to our waiting to resurface. The dolls run. For me, I didn't hesitate. It was the year I spent in college with little to look back at, an apartment with a couple of shoes. I was in my head, breathing heavily. Maybe I was with my heart against my chest, but the more my time I spent in that apartment, the more I got something going on. When I decided to move out of education, little 2-bedroom apartment, what she was trying to was nothing to write home about. We left the cheap all-night worn carpets when finally a direct view of the suitcases, and we spent the rest that taming that hallway, and I was excited to have my boat dock at the port when I signed the contracts. In Baja, they told me I would have a partner. From what happened, someone called. We told them to take me there a year, but sometimes I didn't bother well with my previous companions, so I didn't expect any problems and asked me. The first few weeks were normal. The next trip washed. I spent most of the time in his room, and he only went out occasionally to go to the kitchen or the bathroom. We exchanged greetings, but we didn't talk much at first. I didn't think much of it. Some people are just quieter. But then things started to feel strange. It all started with small details. I would come home after class and find his bedroom door slightly ajar, even though I hadn't seen him leave all day, or I heard noises at night, soft steps, faint whispers that seemed to come from his room even when I was sure he wasn't there. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the walls of the apartment were thinner than they looked and I was listening to the neighbors. But then one night I was late after studying in the library. The apartment was dark and David's door was closed as usual. I assumed he was already asleep. Like this, I walked silently to my room so as not to wake him, but something made me stop. There was a light coming from his door. It wasn't the yellow light of a lamp or the white glow of a light bulb. It was dim, flickering like the light of a lampshade or candle. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should knock on the door, but something stopped me from doing so. The apartment was too quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stayed there a moment longer before I decided to let it go. Whatever David was doing was none of my business. The next morning when I left to go to class, I noticed something strange. David's door was wide open and his room was empty. Not just empty in the sense that he wasn't there, empty in the sense that there was nothing inside the bed. It was done. The desk was clean, and there were no clothes in the closet. It was like no one had slept there in months. I stood at the door bewildered. He had left early. He had gathered all his things before I woke up. Later that day, I ran into Sarah, a friend of mine. In the campus cafeteria, we were chatting for a while, and somehow the conversation came to the subject of my apartment. I mentioned to her to David, asking him if he knew him. Sarah frowned. David, who is that? My roommate, I said, feeling suddenly uncomfortable. She laughed. I thought I lived alone. I laughed too, but the awkwardness didn't go away. No, I definitely have a roommate. He's been there since I moved. But Sarah just shook her head. I've never heard you talk about him. I always thought the apartment was yours. That left me. How could it be possible that she didn't know about David? We'd been friends for years. I'm sure I'd mentioned it before. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember a single moment when I'd told anyone about David, as if somehow his existence had slipped through the cracks of my memory. The weeks that followed were even stranger. David became more inconsistent. Some days, he seemed not to be in the apartment at all. No noises in his room, no dishes in the sink, nothing. Other days, I would see him move down the hallway or in the kitchen, but never long enough to strike up a conversation. He was like a shadow, something that existed on the periphery of my vision, but never stayed long enough to feel real. One night, having dinner with a few friends, the topic of roommates came up again. Wait, said one of them, putting down his fork. Have you been living with someone all this time? I thought you had an apartment to yourself. I just looked around, hoping someone would correct that, but they all agreed yes, I said, feeling my blood run cold. David, I've talked about him before. No, you haven't, said another friend with a signed frown. You've never mentioned anyone named David. Panic got tangled in my throat. How could it be? I was sure I'd mentioned David. Sure no. That night when I got home, I went straight to his door. Something inside me needed answers. I needed to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I squeezed the handle and pushed the door slowly. The room was empty, completely empty. No clothes, no books, no belongings. The bed was bare, the walls without decoration, as if it had never been used. I slowly backed away, my breathing becoming erratic. It couldn't be possible. David had been there. I had seen him. I had talked to him. I hadn't imagined it. I ran to the apartment management office the next day and asked the woman at the counter for David. She looked at some papers and looked at me with a strange expression. David nodded quickly. Yes, my partner. She shook her head. There's no one with that name in the contract. You've lived alone since you moved. In the cold in my chest spread to my whole body. It couldn't be true. I couldn't, but there was no proof. There was no evidence that David had ever been there. No one else remembered it. And at that moment I understood something scary. I wasn't sure David had existed. Since then I've never really felt alone in that apartment. Some nights I still hear footsteps in the hallways. Sometimes his bedroom door opens a little, like something or someone is still there waiting, and in the back of my mind there's always that doubt. What was David, and more importantly, where did he go? Growing up on a farm gets you used to the silence, the kind of silence in which you can hear the wind shaking the crops, the distant hum of a tractor, or the soft clucking of chickens in the distance. But there's a different kind of silence, one that settles in just before something goes wrong. It's a silence that feels too thick, too still, like the earth itself is holding its breath. That's what I felt the night something strange appeared in our cornfield. It was end of October. The harvest was almost finished. My father had already brought most of the corn, leaving only a few rows at the far end of the property. It was late, and the day had been long, but I liked to take a walk in the fields before going to bed, just to clear my mind and listen to the night. That night the air was crisp, the sky was clear, and the moon. It was the perfect weather for a leisurely walk. But as soon as I stepped down from the porch, I knew something was wrong. The familiar symphony of the farm, the chirping crickets and the far-off hoot of an owl, had vanished. The air was thick with silence. A shiver ran down my spine, yet I simply shrugged it off. Perhaps it was simply a shift in the weather. After all, autumn nights could be. I made my way down the gravel path through the fields, my boots crunching with every step. The rows of corn towered above me on either side, their dry leaves rustling softly in the breeze. The moonlight cast long shadows, making the stems look like dark and swaying figures in the night. As I went, I noticed something strange. The animals, the cows in the pasture, the chickens in the henhouse, was restless. The cows were pacing back and forth, snorting and snorting. The Chickens were huddled together silently, and alert it was as if they felt something I couldn't see, and then I heard a faint cracking sound coming from the cornfield. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable over the wind, but it grew louder as I got closer to the edge of the field. I stopped, squinting my eyes to try and see what was causing it. At first I thought it was just the wind, but the way it moved, the sound wasn't natural. It was rhythmic, like footsteps. My heart started beating faster. But I told myself it was probably just a deer or maybe a raccoon. We'd had problems with animals getting into crops before, so it wasn't out of the ordinary, but there was something different about this sound. It was too constant, too intentional, as if what caused it wasn't just wandering. I was walking. Curiosity got the better of me, and I took a step into the cornfield, pushing the tall stems as I moved as quietly as possible. The dry leaves scratched at my arms, the sound of footsteps getting louder. I pricked up my ears, trying to locate where it was coming from, but the sound seemed to move as if it was circulating around me, just out of my sight. And then it caught my eye. Initially, it was merely a shadow, faintly discernible beneath the moonlit sky. Suddenly, I spotted a tall, slender figure gliding between the corn rows directly ahead of me. I stood still, breath caught in my throat, grappling with the reality before me. His height was striking, his limbs elongated, and the way he glided between the stems felt almost otherworldly. I found myself rooted to the spot, eyes fixed on the way I was sinking further into the field. My heart raced, and every fiber of my being urged me to turn back, retreat to the safety of the house, shut the doors, and erase the haunting images from my mind. Yet, an intriguing pull, a peculiar curiosity, urged me onward, trailing the figure while ensuring I remained concealed within the shadows of the corn. The further I ventured, the more I understood that I was delving deeper into the heart of the cornfield, a field awaiting its harvest. The towering stems stood ominously, their elongated shadows stretching across the ground in the eerie glow of the moonlight. In an instant, silence enveloped the space. I crouched low, stifling my breath, attuned to every sound around me. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The stillness was overwhelming. Everything that was present had come to a standstill. I found myself in a state of anticipation. I rose gradually, surveying the expanse, my gaze gliding over each shadowy corner. The figure had vanished from sight, yet I was certain she remained close by. I sensed it just as the animals had sensed it. A chilling dread gripped my heart, and I resolved that it was time to take a stand. As I began to walk away, something caught my attention from the side. There she was once more. This time, I was right on the brink, tantalizingly close. I was standing on the edge of the unharvested corn, partially hidden by the tall stems, but I could make out his tall, unusually thin silhouette with long arms that seemed to extend beyond his knees. His head was tilted slightly as if he was watching me, studying me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, every fiber of my being screaming for me to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed looking at this thing, whatever it was, and then, without warning, he took a step towards the corn around her crunched. The sound of her movement was unmistakable, like dry leaves crawling on the ground. I backed away awkwardly, almost tripping over my own feet. I ran. I crossed the cornfield, not caring what noise it made. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the field. Panting and out of breath, I turned, expecting to see her right behind me, but the field was empty. The only sound was the wind shaking the leaves. I didn't waste time. I ran back to the house with my heart pounding and my mind full of questions I didn't want to answer. I closed the door tightly and secured it and leaned on it, trying to catch my breath. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't get the image of that figure out of my mind, the way it moved, the way it seemed to follow me. The next day I went back to the field, but what I found, there wasn't a footprint. Not exactly, but it was big, about the shape of a foot with long indentations in the earth like claws. I no longer stroll through the fields at night. While many extol the beauty, tranquility, and untouched nature of national parks, few mention just how easy it is to lose your way within their vast expanses. You don't get lost in a way that makes you question everything you think you know about the world. That's exactly what happened to me and my friends when we decided to take a quick hike on one of the park's lesser-known trails. It was supposed to be an easy walk, a little adventure before heading back to camp. But what we found in that forest was anything but fun. It was early autumn, and the trees were just starting to change color. The air was fresh, the sky a perfect blue, and the trail we chose was an easy loop, one of those paths recommended for beginners. With a creek on one side and a few scenic viewpoints on the trail, there were 4 of us. My best friend Chloe, our friends Jake and Emma, and I. We had hiked before, and none of us were worried about get lost or run into trouble after all the way was marked on the map and looked pretty simple. We went out in high spirits, laughing, taking pictures, and enjoying the day. The trail was quiet, with only the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves under our feet. At first everything was perfect. We stopped by the stream to throw stones. We went up to one of the viewpoints to admire the view, and we even joked about how we should have brought snacks because the hike wasn't challenging enough. But at some point things started to feel weird. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but the forest started to get denser. Trees that were once well spaced suddenly seemed to close in on us. Trail markings, those little signs on the trees that were supposed to guide us, became harder to find. It wasn't until we realized that we hadn't seen one in a while that the restlessness really settled in us. Shall we continue on the trail? Jake asked, slowing down and looking around. His voice had lost the relaxed tone of before. It now carried a hint of uncertainty. Chloe, ever the optimist, brushed it off. Let's continue to progress. The path forms a complete loop. Are we destined to return to where we began? Didn't I look around, feeling that the problem was that the forest didn't look familiar anymore. Just an endless expanse of tall trees, thick undergrowth, and elongated shadows. I didn't want to admit it, but a knot of anxiety was forming in my stomach. We hadn't seen another hiker in hours, and the sunlight was starting to fade. Emma, normally quiet and reserved, finally spoke. I think we got lost. We shouldn't have seen the creek again. Yes, I admitted, trying not to make my voice sound shaky. Maybe we should go back the way we came. Jake pulled out his phone to check the GPS, but we all knew what was going to happen. No signal, he said, shaking his head, and the map app doesn't load. Of course, we weren't too deep into the park, and none of us had thought to bring a physical map. A classic mistake, right? Chloe took command, as I always did in these situations. Let's keep moving forward. Sooner or later we'll find the path again. We all agreed, though none of us felt as safe as before. The sun was starting to sink into the horizon, casting an orange light through the branches, but there was something more than just the waning light or the colder and colder air. The forest felt bad. It's hard to explain, but it was like the forest was watching us. The birds had stopped singing. The sounds of wildlife had completely disappeared. Every rustling of leaves, every broken branch beneath our feet felt amplified, as if it came from something just out of sight. More than once I looked over my shoulder. I swore I saw movement among the trees, but every time I turned to look there was nothing. We should stop and think about this, Emma said, her tense voice. I don't like this, but Chloe kept moving forward. We're all right, Em. We just need to find the trail. It must be close. We kept walking for another hour. The light was fading quickly, and the forest was getting stranger. The trees seemed too uniform, all the same height, standing upright in an unnatural way. The branches spread out like knotted fingers, and the air was so still that it seemed that the forest was holding its breath. And then we found the other group. At first I thought it was a joke, like in those TV shows where another group of hikers appears out of nowhere to scare you, but when we got closer it was clear that something wasn't right. There were 3 of them standing in the middle of the trail, or at least what we thought was the trail. They were together with their backs to us. They were dressed hiking clothes, but the way they were so still, so stiff, gave me goosebumps. Hey, Jake shouted, his voice echoing strangely in the silence. Are you lost too? There was no response. They didn't even move. We stopped a few feet away from them, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was definitely wrong. Their immobility, the way they didn't even turn to recognize us, wasn't normal. Maybe they didn't hear us, Chloe suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. Take a step forward, trying to get a better look. Excuse me, I said in a lower voice this time. We're a little lost. Do you know where the trail is? Again, nothing. No movement. It was like they were frozen in place. Emma grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Let's go. Now I didn't need her to tell me twice. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of there. I turned to leave, and then one of them, the tallest, turned his head. I'll never forget that moment. The way he moved, the slow turn and spasmodic, as if he hadn't used his neck muscles in years, and his face wasn't right. Too pale, too expressionless. His eyes too wide, and the way he looked at us. Not like he saw us, but like he looked right through us. Those eyes held an emptiness, devoid of any spark of life. Run, Chloe urged, her voice a mere breath. There was no need for repetition. We fled, not glancing back, pushing ourselves until our legs could bear no more. When we finally halted, the forest had transformed. Miraculously, we discovered the path home, though we could never grasp how. Conversations dwindled after that, and the park remained untouched by our presence. Even now, in the stillness of night, those shadowy figures linger in my thoughts. What if we hadn't escaped?